Hey, Paul Ingbretson. We're talking painting. We're talking painting specifically from the Boston School, and I'm back to picking up Margie's question. I'm going to read Margie's question to you. You're going to see it on your screen. But she does something that I find not unusual when you're trying to figure painting out, and that is, I don't know if the word is complexify, but combine things. And one of the things I've learned over time studying anything is to, the expression today is to unpack them. In other words, to break them up into components that are manageable, and make sure you don't confuse two or three with two or three with each other. So, but Margie's question is this. I'm going to read it to you. She says, you've mentioned how we should visualize the subject as a finished painting. So you have that in your mind. I've suggested that people need to be able to visualize the subject as a finished painting. That's what she's saying. And then she says, I have a difficult time with that. How do you recommend a look and imagine a finished painting? So she wants to definitely discuss imagining a finished painting. Can you imagine, visualize, imagine? So she's combining those words. And so how do you recommend a look? And that's not, I'm not exactly sure whether she means how do I recommend one look, how to look and imagine. But those are all valid points. Keep remembering that when you're dealing with this kind of a question, you're talking to an impressionist. And I think you'll find that most people, say for example, Jerome or Leighton or any of those guys, as far as the finish of their paintings is concerned, you get the same thing every single time. I mean, they knew exactly to what degree they were going to finish the painting. And doesn't mean that they would have been painting one picture the same color as the next, which some people did. I mean, it's like, for example, Millet is an example of a painter whose basic color scheme doesn't seem to change very much from one painting to the next. And that's a ridiculous overstatement, but in so many of his figurative works that are based on memory and where he's painting out of his head, he resorts to some very, very curiously similar things to make up a color scheme. And I don't mean to get into that right now, but we're not talking about that. We're talking as impressionists, and your job is actually, and this is again quoting a not-impressionist, an imaginative painter, Ang. He says you have to be able to preconceive, right? And he's talking about the idea of preconceiving. Now, it doesn't mean you come in with a preconceived idea. It means for an impressionist, that means you come in as an impressionist and you look at the thing, and now you're going to sit there and look until you preconceive, until you have a grasp. And this is what takes a lot of imagination. You actually have to have this sense of the thing that you can say, I think I'll recognize that when I see it. I'm pretty sure I'll recognize that when I see it. It always reminds me, whenever I tell this, it always reminds me of my dad when he was in his Alzheimer's and toward the end of his life. And I remember coming to the house, and I didn't know he had the problem yet. And I walked up, and he smiled at me with a smile I'd never seen before, actually. And I was very gratified to see him smiling at me. And he said, I think I know that guy. And but it's very much like that. You need to get into your mind that you believe enough of an awareness, of a sense of a thing, so that you'll keep pursuing and pursuing, as and knowing that that's still not it. That's still not it. But you have to have a sense of the thing. Does that mean you've got a photographic memory or anything like that? Not even a little bit. No, it's different from that. So if you have a figure, it's an example, a similar figure standing before you, and you have to do a figure drawing. The figure has a gesture, but it's a complex series of angles, a whole bunch of things in combination, but we still call it a gesture. And you have to preconceive that gesture. You have to look at it until you sort of rather own that gesture in your mind. If you actually want to achieve that gesture. I mean, there are methods and devices for transferring, measuring, stuff like that. And I always laugh when somebody says, and it all came out okay. Well, it doesn't just come out okay. You have to have an idea of the thing fixed in your mind and eye, or it doesn't just come out okay. Or as Ang says, you're just pushing shapes around all day long. I think that's a pretty important thing to know, though, that we're not having a photographic memory of it. And you're not imagining it. You look and you look and you let it in. You let it saturate your soul in some way so that you can then look up and say, all right, I'm going to go for it. And you're beginning, and I believe I'll recognize this as I get close. And then your job is to go pursue the relationships of things in that hunt. One of the great values of a Boston School start is how much information they put down that summarizes the essential beauty of the thing. That's far different from a painting. I remember working with Gamel, and we'd be 30 days into a portrait. I remember specifically saying, Paul, you're 30 days into this portrait, and you still don't have any idea whether it's a good picture or not. And you could pick on me for being a 2-year student or something or other, but the point is, I found that really frustrating and not necessary. Once you get to the Boston School, these guys are saying on the first day that this is going to be worth pursuing, this is going to be worth finishing. All the data's there. It's like a great summary statement. It's a summing up. Well, to have made a great summary statement implies a couple things, but one of them is to have had a concept in your mind of the thing. And that's the difficulty. And how to do it better, I don't know if I can even tell you how. I would suggest that when you're trying to understand, you're trying to get it into yourself, that you look at the thing whole, look at it as a whole. Look at it, try to see it as if it were already a finished painting. In that way, we mean what Margie's saying. Look at it as if it were already a finished painting. Now, I would suggest you blur your eyes a little bit, not blur them to the point they lose the color, but just defocus your eyes. That's a better term. And just put them in an a-focused mindset. So you're taking in the thing as a whole and not losing color quality. And imagining it framed. And try to let that set in your imagination for a while. Try to let that settle into your imagination. And but that's one of the ways of getting it there, of getting it to the point of thinking, I think I'll recognize that. So let's see if I can pick up and make sure I've not lost a straw here. So how do you recommend to look? So I've given you that, and imagine a finished painting. So the question is, now you're at the end of the painting, you shouldn't have to imagine the finished painting anymore. You should actually be looking at this, your own painting whole and looking at it and saying, is that it yet? Is that doing what I thought of as the essential beauty? What tends to happen if you're raised in a sort of a realist background, which a bunch of my students were by me, in that Gamel background, was that there was nothing going on except for you to keep on pushing through, as Gamel would say, until the whole thing was noodled up to the nth degree and would look like a Paxton. And, I would find myself often defeating the most serious beauties in color, for example, by that pursuit. And partially that's just a skill problem, but mostly it's not just a skill problem. There is an essential beauty to what you're looking at, a primary beauty, a first beauty, that when you've achieved it, you've achieved enough. You've achieved, you might say, the one requirement of a painting, and that is to make a point. Not to make every point, not to be all things to all men in all pictures, but to make a single point. I remember writing letters to the editor in the old days. I've always been a sort of a politically minded person on some level, and I would write letters to the editors, and I would usually throw in 3 or 4 important things, and before you know it, nobody could understand what I was talking about and didn't know which point to be concerned about. And I learned to make a single point and leave. And I think painting is very much the same way. What's your point? So if you've seen a beauty, what is it? Is the beauty of this thing essentially in the color and the light, or is it essentially in the form and the shape making? Now, it doesn't mean you're going to do bad things in those other ways. You have to be competent in all the other ways, no matter which it is. So it's not like you get out of that. But if your idea of a finish is the same every time, you'll be like Paxton. But if your idea of a finish is when you've found what the essential beauty is, you're going to leave, it'll be like those various days where a Benson resides. He's different one day from the next because he's got to his essential beauty and he's left. There's a nice example of that, a really, really nice example of that is The Blue Cup by Joseph de Camp. This guy could draw as well as any in the Boston School, to the point where it was clear that Gamel felt that he was a superior to Paxton in draftsmanship. And it was clear in our conversations. Other people might want to dispute that, but that's what I took from his conversations. And I took it that Gamble was actually rather intimidated by him. But the thing is, in the blue cup, you'll see him doing, I think the passage where the blue cup itself is, or all sorts of areas throughout the entire figure. There's these disappearing acts continually going on. The guy is not, as Gamble would describe it, pushing through. Now, Paxton, you'll find plenty of nice lost areas and that sort of thing. But Gamble had, Paxton had this sort of almost a moral requirement in his brain, like a if it's not good this way and this way and this way and this way and this way, let's say if it's not worked up, never mind good, if it's not worked up in all these different ways, then you're not a competent painter. You have to bring all these qualities every time to a painting, and that's simply not the case. And that's the view I bring to this. So hopefully that helps a little bit with Margie's question there. Yeah, and then to finish in the question of how you know where you want to be, and it's everything about to do with what you aimed at. If you didn't see it, if you didn't say, look, now what is the magic in this thing? And then sit there and get your head around it and know which kind of poem you're going to write. Is it going to be a limerick? Is it going to be an epic? Is it going to be, if you didn't know that, of course you won't know when you're finished. But get your head around the essential beauty and try to get in and get out. I always tell students, try to see what you can get away with. This isn't a moral question. Gamble would say that repeatedly. This isn't a question of right and wrong. And it's not a question of this method or that method. Gamble himself would admit to that and say it. But it's actually a question of what's your purpose? Get in, achieve it, bring the beauty, and don't bring 10 other things that prove your genius. This isn't about you. This is about drawing forth the beauty. As an impressionist, I'm talking again. It's about drawing forth the beauty. When you've achieved that, silence your voice. Walk away. But you got to know what that is from the very beginning. You have to have an idea what the essential beauty is and know when to back off, right? So I'll leave it at that for now. So thank you, Margie, for that question. Comment if you want to get further conversation about it. I was told by my producer to get the word share, like, comment, or subscribe. We're trying to go to the point of looking for subscribers, and that would be nice. So I guess Patreon is the likely place we're heading. So all right. Now, one of the things that happens, this question came just by email. This is from a student from a long time ago. And she's asking questions about, I think, something called window shading versus spot, painting by the spot. And that's a pretty big question. That's a pretty big deal in our way of working. Hale, in the book on Vermeer, is talking about painting by the spot specifically. And I believe it's even referenced, and it would be by anybody who's thinking impressionistically, there's always this conversation about painting by the spot. And literally, the conversation goes again, and I've referred to this before, but you'll hear it more than once from me, and that is the idea of being all over the place at once in the start is a classic aphorism of the Boston School. You have to be all over the place at once in the start. The start, on the other hand, also, by the way, which is something that's achieved in one day or not much more than one day, a quality start has the essential data of the painting, has the great forms, the great color relationships, the visual order of the effects, the drawing, the proportions, the great gestural things, the placement on the page. The thing is a good composition placement-wise. So those things are all inherent in a good composition by Boston School painter, by a person who thinks that way, who's a direct painter, and is setting up his painting in the start so he can actually say, yes, this is going to be worth pursuing, right, to some greater degree of excellence, to pushing it, as it were, but not pushing it in the sense of pushing it to that closed finish in the same sense as a Paxton. But that whole picture in your mind, if you picture that, blah, 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 that's different from the idea of window shading as I understand that word. And that word might be used differently by other people, but there are people who will essentially start in an area and finish that area and then sprout and finish the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. Some people start, say, with an eye or a nose. Other people start, and I think I read somewhere Braga talking about starting up in the left corner of the picture and then working his way down to the right corner, because he was right-handed or whatever, and so he wasn't going to dirty up his whatever. He must have had a preliminary drawing, if I remember right. There was some sort of a preliminary drawing there. And then he worked literally drawing exactly what he saw, section by section. And that's window shading, where you're literally drawing down this thing, like pulling the window shade down and opening the window. And it's one of those things that no impressionist in his right mind would do, because there's no discussion about the note up in the left corner talking to the note in the right corner. There's no discussion like that. It's just a presumed way of handling the world in front of you. Those guys typically are still working, the Braga types are still working with the idea of painting nature in front of you. But and Gamble took that to be Impressionism, just painting whatever's sitting there in front of you to be Impressionism. It's not Impressionism in the same sense as that person who's actually looking for where the music lies in a great distributed field of color and will do whatever it takes to be here, then again to be there, to be everywhere, and working these associations, these relationships. That's a different world of Impressionist work. There's a presumption about the other type that the painting is a lot more like fool the eye painting, where there's a presumption about literalism, literally painting, as it were, realism. And so you can paint realistically right across it. And roughly speaking, the thing will probably plausibly look, it'll sort of hang together. But it's hanging together primarily because you're working the same way across it. Where an impressionist is working all over the place at once. And Paxton said at one point, he said, if you have a color note in your brush, go look around and see where else you could put it in the painting. Make sure you distribute that note. Now that's a different kind of a mindset, and I hope you can follow that idea. But so the idea of painting by the spot, and this is the question that I keep going. I'm going to go back and forth between window shading and painting by the spot, But Hale says, so when you're drawing a leopard, you don't draw the leopard and put the spots on. When you see the leopard, you look across the room, you see the spots. And what you're doing is you're putting the spots down. You may never actually see the leopard. It may not actually show. And that's a different world from that of drawing an object. And I suggest to you that what an impressionist actually does is he draws color spots. And if you look at Monet, you can see that he's putting his color spots down. If you look at Metcalfe, who, by the way, some people would regard as a on some days at least, a better handler of values than Monet, for the purposes of drawing and that sort of thing, as a painter by the spot, in much the same way as Monet. And he still winds up with what you would call articulate trees, for example, and that sort of thing. Now, the opposite of painting by the spot is painting objects. Pure and simple. I mean, in any case, though, if you're searching in an impressionist way you're going to paint something, you see that there's a green over here. You're going to go set the green over there. You're going to set a spot of green over there, and you're going to reconnoiter and compare it with other greens and other colors, other things. The levels of saturation will be tested against other things. So this whole thing winds up becoming an enormously involved relational discussion. Which is one of the things that gradually, slowly wakes you up to where the music lies in painting. That it's an eyeball problem, that it's a color relations problem, that it's a color distribution problem, that it's and that's again where I really do recommend you look at Degas and consider what he's doing as a composer in his late days. In his last say 25 years of his life or so, probably from the 80s onward or so, I think is when you'd look at him. So, but that's the difference, that's it. So, now I think I have another interesting question that's related to that one, if I can find it here. All right. Yeah, I guess that covers it, yeah. By the way, this person has the kindness to say, my paintings are beautiful and with untouchable realism. Whatever you're doing, I'm very glad to know you. So it's nice that they allow that. One of the things, by the way, that I think makes it a worthwhile question, that here I am talking about painting by the spot, but my modus operandi is to be able to paint in such a way that I could leave it in an open field and it would look unified at whatever stage it's at, or I could keep pushing it and it would look at least, and this is my model for those days, at least as refined. I'd have the control of it to the point of being at least as refined as a Paxton. In other words, to be rather highly noodled up. And yet the model I take is a different one. I use an Impressionist model from beginning to end. What I really like, and I haven't addressed this yet, but what I really like about the Boston School model, what I think of as the painting with your eyes model, is that it's a relational proposition. You have to learn a series. You have to learn a series of disciplines, or they say, the discipline of doing relational every time, and you have to learn to do relationships of values, of colors, of intensities, of sizes, of edge relationships. The set of those relationships makes the music in a picture. It also makes the truth in a picture. But the idea, though, is you want a method. I want to use the word fractals. And it was described to me, the pictures you see in books when you read about it a little bit will show you a Paisley pattern. And so the Paisley shape will sit there with this big thing and a whatever. And then you'll notice that sections of their big Paisleys making the whole shape is made out of Paisleys all the way around here. And then you see that inside every one of these little Paisleys that makes up the big Paisley, there's a dinky little Paisleys, and they're reduced littler and littler and littler and littler. Well, in a sense, so what I'm saying is that there's a way of working that I've set up, and I don't mean I've set up, that I've created, but I've discovered, which is, in discipline, it's equivalent to that. You don't have to learn 1,000 disciplines. You have to learn one, and that has to be relational. And so what you're trying to do in the great start of the painting, you're trying to be relational regarding great things, important things, and you want to have spoken about everything. So you're all over the place at once in the start talking about everything, right? And then when you go to a section, which is the back, say everything is looking really good, you'll go, say, to the center of interest area of the picture and let that lead and begin to be more developed than the rest, because it's one of the most logical things to do if you want your painting to maintain its unity. As I say, maintain a unity around the center of interest, which is by definition what pictures do. And so you're going to go to a littler area. In that area, you're going to simply do it the same kind of organizing. You're going to look at the thing as a whole, and you're going to organize the major relationships in those areas, having checked first, of course, to see that those elements, like the color, is right to the whole, that the size of the mass you're working with is right to the whole. And then you're going to work the relations with those areas locally. It's the same single discipline, though. It's just compare, relate, this to this, that to that. And by the way, that's a kind of a summary that was offered to me by my first Impressionist teacher. He said, summing it up, he said, it's just this to this and that to that. Well, that is actually true. And again, that's because you're able to think of the world, or to know that the world, when you think about it, and the only world you can actually put on canvas is a world of color values. So if you think of the world as color values, then it's just a question of where they are in the canvas and how they relate to each other in those various ways. So the canvas is now taking nature and relating all these parts in those various ways. Of course, the key to the discovery of beauty is watching how watch them play to each other, and you suddenly begin to become the discoverer. You'll actually go into these places where you're like the great explorer of beauty. I love that concept that I think it's Velázquez who talks about an Impressionist, and he says the Impressionist is one who sits before nature and just works with the truth of nature until what he calls the poetry begins to come forward. And that's that honest search for the relationships. That's the poetry in painting. The poetry is in the relationships of the colors, of the values, of the spots, and the way they distribute on a page, and how they move in size and shape in relation to each other. There's so many aspects of this, but they're all one. It's an eyeball one. So one of them, I forget if it's Tarbell or DeCamp, when he said it's just the right color, the right value, in the right place, is telling you something different from, say, you got to learn to draw the anatomy of a canary if you're doing canaries, or the lay of feathers on a bird, how do they overlap each other, or the number of pistils in a flower. I mean, yeah, really? Is that your job as a painter? Now, if you're an honest eyeball, you're going to have all those things will count. You will have the right numbers. You'll have the anatomy right if you're good at relational. But it doesn't work the other way around. You can be good at anatomy all day and never make a good picture. I mean, that's real. You have a major problem if you haven't thought through the key elements of painting, which is that its beauty lies, or should say the key aspect of painting, that the beauty lies in the relationships of the sizes of things, of the colors of things, of the angles of things, the gestures of things, and their distribution across the page. Joy, I mean, that's welcome to the real world. Welcome to the world of painting music. I'd love to bring a further discussion into this if we have a couple more seconds, and that is that I'm really trying to encourage people to think through what this is, and I say what this art form is, and I encourage people right now. I'm encouraging people to think about whether painting, and to what degree painting is like music. So much of the world has started revolving around the subject, and I'll torture that one. I'll torture people in that discussion forever. But illustration, the subject, when you're talking about something important, like the oath of the tennis court, what could be more important than the oath of the tennis court by David? When you're talking about that subject matter, how is that art again? You don't even think of it as being art. Now, if you said something really important, like the death of a great martyr or something like that, then you could almost say that conceivably could be, well, art, but still, people have done really bad jobs painting those kinds of things. So when are they good art and when are they bad art? Well, they're good art and they're bad art when, as art, they're good or bad. And what is art? Well, that's in my world. That's the world of color relations, value relations, form and form distribution, and the play of this stuff visual. If you're not good at that, you're not good at anything. And subject ain't going to help you. It's going to save you even a little bit. And unfortunately, that stuff is so transient anyway. I mean, one person's politics is another person's headache, you know what I mean? One person's inspiration, another person's pain. So, what is that going to get you? But on the other hand, if it's music, and music is the distribution of notes along a line, the play, and the play of sets of things in a unity along a great, I just think of symphony and stuff like that. Music doesn't have anything to do with words, doesn't have anything to do with subject at all. You can sing music, you can sing words. Words have been sung. Great hymns writing has been done to accommodate, or, so we say Beethoven's Ninth or something like that. And it certainly has inspired good word writing, but the art is in the music, rather, is in the not word part. And I'm going to suggest that you think about this one possibility, and that is, in our art form, the music is in the visual. It's not in the subject. It's in the visual. It's in the dance of color and color relations, right? Where a guy like Degas will talk about how one of the great beauties is when one color is in just what one color does side by side with the same color at a different chroma or value. I mean, you're starting to talk about somebody who gets the idea of music in that way. Or if you're talking about, as I mentioned before, the Michelangelo and the counterpoint, the idea of this beautiful line on the figure being picked up by the other line, say down at the calf, and this beautiful relationship, point and counterpoint, curve and countercurve, and a beautiful line, and at a beautiful angle, and a beautiful size relationship. That's where the music lies, guys. And you won't possibly, I'm concerned that you may not get there if you don't study nature for that, which is the impressionist eye. Even when you're drawing, it's the impressionist eye. It's the idea of the look of nature and what it's doing with other things, not what it is. And even Gamma would tell you that. We're not doing the actual, we're doing the visual. So anyway, I'll leave it at that for this time. And again, if you don't mind sharing, your comments are welcome, the usual stuff, or subscribe. I look forward to hearing from you and seeing you again maybe next week.